Kicking off at number 5, The Void. We cannot make this list without featuring 2016's The Void somewhere on it, and still, strangely enough, I don't know why, but this film gets brushed off as a terrible example of dialogue, set design, characterization, and just screenwriting in general, that I'm starting to think that someone, somewhere, has a massive grudge against this movie and they're leading some bizarre slandering campaign against it. Also, as a side note, because I'm not trying to defend the plot of this movie, because truthfully, I don't think it needs defending because it's awesome, but one of my favourite new tidbits of information is to look at this movie as a sequel to a movie that never got made. Really, because if you play along with that, this is like watching Halloween 2 without knowing what Halloween 1 is or what even happened. And if that's the case, for me anyway, it makes the whole incomprehensible cosmic horror scope even greater. Really, the whole point of cosmic horror is to orchestrate a fear of the unknown. And yeah, guys, that's The Void. Also, this film is just gorgeous and has some of the greatest physical effects of this decade. I'm just saying. Written and directed by Steven Kostanski and Jeremy Gillespie, The Void is essentially a horror movie under siege from a maligned cosmic horror death cult in the only place where such a movie like that could ever plausibly take place, a hospital. It begins with local deputy Daniel Carter finding James, a character that has just fled the supposed imprisonment of the aforementioned cosmic cult, who is covered in blood and crawling on the roadside. Obviously, as you do, Deputy Carter takes him to the local hospital where his estranged wife Allison works. They're joined by Dr. Powell, Nurse Beverly, Kim the intern, a pregnant patient named Maggie, her grandfather Ben, and a pretty bum out of luck patient, Cliff. And well, that's all the components that we would ever need should any of those previously mentioned characters suddenly develop a strange urge to burst at the seams and then start flaying people's faces off, presumably under the cosmic influence of a terrifying, triangular, black pyramid empire. Honestly, I don't want to say any more in fear of ruining this gem of a movie, but start to finish, this is one of the finest examples of cosmic horror captured on recent film. If someone ever tells you that this film sucked, then tell them to be quiet. They're wrong. Swinging in at number 4, Banshee Chapter, 2013.
Can't see anything.
Okay, two things that go together better than an awkward handshake and a strangely limbed cultist are the two particular narrative devices in question here. Cosmic horror and mind-altering chemical substances, particularly dimethyltryptamine and maybe like the Heidi's star cluster, but that's just my best guess. I don't really know, my directions are off. The thing is, you may have been aware of this movie, 2013's Banshee Chapter, and been bogged down by its gung-ho use of jump scares, but that's not why this movie is here. This movie is here because it's one of the most successful horror movies of recent times to accurately portray the mind-altering gravitas of the cosmic horror genre. It's difficult to pin down because you could argue, why aren't Jacob's Ladder or Altered States part of that niche? And while I'd say that's a good question, but whilst those films skirt around the edges of truth and non-truth, Banshee Chapter gives no such ambiguity. That mind is a terrifying place, particularly if it's in lieu of a species from another dimension, but I think I've said too much already. Written and directed by Blair Erickson and produced by Zachary Quinto, yes, that's Zachary Quinto, Banshee Chapter is a found footage piece that tells the tale of James Hurst, played by Michael McMillan, a young amateur sleuth who is in investigative pursuit of Project MK Ultra. Yes, that one. As part of that research, he decides to take the same drug used in the MK Ultra experiments, DMT-19, and whilst his friend films his reaction, soon a bizarre musical hum and strange voices begin to broadcast themselves from a nearby radio, announcing that something or someone is coming towards the house and that it wants to wear them. Yes, I did just say wear them. We'll probably stop there in fear of spoilers because seriously, when this movie gets going, it really goes the distance and you'll have to certainly hold on to your own mind in fear of crumbling into the dark pit of infinity, aka the pineal gland. Yeah, you're correct. This film is based on Lovecraft's 1920 short story From Beyond and also pretty much a recombobulation of the 1986 Stuart Gordon film of the same name, but that doesn't make it any less awesome. This one well and truly hit the nail on the head. Next up at number 3, In the Mouth of Madness, 1995.
Missing. Huh? Sutter Kane.
Do you read Sutter Kane? And listen guys, I could stand here all day with a smile on my face and that could probably suffice for this particular number 3 entry, but really, I'm sure that we can all hold this film up in the highest of regard as one of the finest examples of not only cosmic horror, but metafictional, physical, maybe, horror. You see, John Carpenter is a genuinely sublime filmmaker, and he took all of the key components laid out by Lovecraft and decided to retroactively fit his own form into cosmic horror. In many ways, I like to think of In the Mouth of Madness as a greatest hits version of everything that makes the strange and the bizarre tick. And so you may be thinking, why the hell is it only number 3 then? Shut up, Jack. And whilst my response to that is our final 2 entries are as close to cosmic horror perfection as it can come, this one is perhaps the gatekeeper. Although it will just take a moment or two of folding your own existence upon itself and then being chased down a corridor of unspeakable horror. But that would be spoilers, wouldn't it? So let's not do that. Written by Michael DeLuca and forming the 3rd and final installment of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, In the Mouth of Madness tells the tale of John Trent, played by the brilliant Sam Neill, a freelance insurance investigator who is tasked with investigating a claim by a New York-based literary giant, Arcane Publishing. Eventually, after being attacked at lunch by an agent with an axe, Trent is informed of the disappearance of Arcane Publishing's biggest asset, Sutter Kane, a horror novelist who has taken the world by storm and has seemingly slipped off the face of Earth after writing his final manuscript for his final novel. And as the case gradually unravels itself, Trent laughs off the claims that Sutter Kane's novels can cause disorientation, memory loss, and even hysteria in less stable readers. Do you read Sutter Kane? Of course he doesn't, not yet anyway. Listen, we'll stop there in fear of spoilers, but really guys, if you haven't been able to decipher by now, In the Mouth of Madness is one of the finest cosmic horror movies ever made, and I'm not entirely sure whether even it knows it. Coming in at number 2, Annihilation, 2018.
Okay, so we know what happened to the last group. They went insane.
There is something about Oscar Isaac's demeanour in that scene that truly disturbs me, and believe me guys, that isn't even the half of it. In fact, that's just the beginning. Now you may be scratching your head a little bit and questioning as to how 2018's Annihilation can reach such lofty heights so quickly, but guys, I'm fairly certain that when it comes to cosmic horror, this movie is near perfection. Perhaps it's down to the framing of the movie itself, or perhaps it's the absolutely brilliant source material that is based upon Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy. Maybe it's the physical effects, maybe it's the genuinely awesome use of CGI in this movie, which is rare. I don't know guys, but Annihilation strikes a chord somewhere. It's a puzzle of a movie, and every single frame offers something uniquely disturbing. That one feeling that chimes louder than any other emotion when facing down cosmic horror. Confusion. But not in the contrived sense, because really, narratively and visually, this film is incredibly straightforward to follow, but the small, strange pit stops in between, I haven't got a clue. Annihilation scares me in a way that few horror movies do. It's the incomprehension of it that somehow wraps its tentacles around your mind. And also, it's such a pretty picture that it's damn near impossible to look away from. Take note, Eldritch Overlords. Or actually, don't. Written and directed by Alex Garland and based upon the 2014 novel of the same name by Jeff Vandermeer, Annihilation tells the tale of a strange landscape at the edge of the southern United States, an anomalous zone known as the Shimmer, that after a strange meteor landed off the coast of a lighthouse 3 years prior to the event of the movie, began to cause some increasingly perplexing biological occurrences. It stars Natalie Portman as Lena, a member of one of the exploratory expeditions tasked with investigating the zone, and after her husband's group goes missing, she heads on in alongside her own crew. A psychologist, Dr. Ventress, a physicist, Josie, a geomorphologist, Cass, and a paramedic, Anya. And believe me, they're going to need all of the expertise that they can muster. I don't want to say any more about this plot because once you're in, you're in. And watching this movie for the first time is the closest that you'll come to unbridled cosmic confusion horror. Pure, untapped, unexplainable, I don't even know. You'll be thinking about this film long after you finish watching it, and it certainly takes a hold of you. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, The Thing, 1982. And this is the part of the episode where I talk about how you wouldn't be expecting this movie and then trying to justify why it's here, yada yada yada. But listen guys, I know that in the past I've deliberately left off The Thing down to the credit that it has already garnered because it's one of the best films ever made. But when we hold it up to this list in particular, there is no other movie that could take the number 1 spot. The Thing is the definition of cosmic horror. It checks all the boxes, every anomalous detail, every extra tendril and elongated spine, every strange, horrifying, otherworldly scream from the begotten corners of space, hell and damnation, and all of the creatures that it consumed along the way. And then some. It goes a distance through time and space, and yet John Carpenter's The Thing never shows us all of the cosmic significance that this movie suggests. We never once take our eye off the fact that we literally know nothing about the creature in question. In fact, we probably know more about Azathoth and Cthulhu than we do about The Thing, and the sole reason is why this is the greatest cosmic horror movie ever made. I mean, also there are 1,000 other reasons, but hey, we've got to talk about the Bennings in the room first, because frankly, I don't trust anyone in this room. Yeah, I'm looking at you. You see, The Thing isn't just about a horrifying unknown entity that has crash landed in the Antarctic and begins to feast on a remote way station. It's far more than that. It could have been that, and it probably would have still been a different movie, but The Thing is deeper than that. It's psychological. It's a story about paranoia and mistrust, and it's about how quickly the bonds of loyalty and trust can be frayed by an outside source. Admittedly, none of us would ever really stand a chance when facing down The Thing, but yeah, that goes without saying. I don't need to tell you anything about this movie from a narrative perspective, because if you haven't yet seen it, stop what you're doing and go and watch the greatest cosmic horror movie ever made, if not the greatest horror movie ever made. Yeah, that's all there is to it. The Thing, number 1. Of course. Kicking off at number 5, The Endless, 2017.
There's something down there. I saw it.
And first and foremost, I absolutely adore this movie. You see, it's been quite a while since we've spoken about The Endless, and I hope that the first time around, for those of you that were here back then, you had reason to check this remarkable movie out. After all, we're all stuck in a quantum loop of sorts, and time is but a prison. The thing is, it has often been said that there are a few components to The Endless that need to be experienced first before fully appreciating this movie, those being 2012's resolution and 2014's spring. And whilst I certainly kind of agree, I won't let that bog you down too much, because on several viewings, The Endless, in my opinion, is very close to being a standalone masterpiece. You see, Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, the two filmmakers behind 2017's The Endless as well as the aforementioned movies, can't help but create cosmic horror. Their work drips with the very life essence of what makes cosmic horror tick, and that's exactly what makes this movie so accessible, because it's in the finer details of The Endless where the true existential dread lies. Created by Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, who also star in this movie as happenstance brothers Justin and Aaron, The Endless tells the tale of the two siblings in question who receive a mysterious video cassette in the mail sent to them by Camp Arcadia, a sort of commune out in the countryside that they belong to as young adults. You see, the two brothers are split on just exactly what happened to them in their young adulthood. Justin remembers Camp Arcadia being a bizarre UFO death cult that they escaped the terrifying clutches of, and yet Aaron remembers them as a warm, fuzzy, completely harmless, friendly commune that they spent some good times with. Either way, whatever the truth of the matter, curiosity gets the better of them and proceeds to proverbially kill the cat, and the two brothers then decide to return to Camp Arcadia just for a single day to see what all the fuss was about. Yeah, and that's all I'll say, because that's all the framing that you need for this brilliant movie. The Endless is proof that cosmic horror needs only a simple premise to be effective, because as I said before, the culmination of existential fear lies in the finer details of things. Check it out. Swinging in at number 4, The Mist, 2007.
Norm? What the f?
Oh no, Norm. Poor guy. Believe me, that's not the worst of it though, because the beauty of this movie is that no matter the hordes of cosmic horror that may be lurking outside in the mist, sometimes the most horrifying of monsters can often be found lingering within the human heart. I mean, kind of anyway, because those tentacular behemoths, although only briefly glimpsed, are certainly the definition of toe-dash darkness and cosmic horror dread. Tentacles, guys, it's pretty straightforward. The point is, 2007's The Mist has often been brushed away or overlooked when it comes to cosmic horror, but I think in many ways this was one of Stephen King's most cosmically horrifying of novellas. You see, it's no guessing that King is a huge fan of Lovecraft, and his admiration for cosmic horror has played a key theme in his myriad of works, but when Project Arrowhead gets whirring away in an effort to summon the darkness of the void here on Earth, yeah, this is exactly the result. And what do you expect when you go poking about with the fabric of time and space? Not again. Written and directed by Frank Darabont, who is perhaps the rare breed of filmmaker who has actually managed to do justice to Stephen King's prose. Of course, 2007's The Mist is based on King's 1980 novella of the same name. And although Darabont's interpretation certainly does justice to the narrative, it also features an entirely iconic and original ending that made even Stephen King shudder, but we don't want to spoil that now, do we? It tells a tale of David Drayton, played by the absolutely brilliant Thomas Jane, as he and his 8-year-old son Billy head to the local supermarket supermarket to pick up some supplies. Little do they know, but their small town of Bridgeton, Maine has actually been the site of a series of government operations that has led to a bizarre, all-consuming mist that descends around the town. Oh, and within that mist come a whole host of tentacular monsters. Again. Also, Mrs. Carmody, everybody, and we all know that she's just the worst. The point is, if you haven't experienced this remarkable adaptation, then you certainly should. The Mist is the best kind of cosmic horror in its straightforwardness, and I do think I'll never truly recover from that ending. Next up at number 3, The Cabin in the Woods, 2012.
I have the Harbinger on line 2.
Oh, Christ. Can you take a message?
I don't think so. He's really pushy.
The Harbinger's on line 2. Now that's a call you should never miss. Truth be told, on first viewing, that should have really been a warning sign. But hey, Joss Whedon manages to craft such a breakneck cosmic horror ride in 2012's The Cabin in the Woods that you might not ever truly understand what you're watching until it's too late. At first viewing, I kind of thought that this movie was a little too smart for its own good, and the true extent of its brilliance took quite a while for me to fully appreciate its cosmic horror and seep its unassuming tentacles into my mind. But hey, I suppose that's the most efficient method to deliver existential dread, and you may be sensing a theme in this particular series. Hint, it's existential dread. Also, before we get into the bulk of this movie, I just want to highlight one particular guy, Richard Jenkins, who, whilst he only has a minor role in The Cabin in the Woods as Gary Sitterson, one of the engineers behind the titular cabin, he's just brilliant, man. He plays some of the funnest roles in cinema. He's Robert Doback in Step Brothers, Giles in The Shape of Water, Chicory in Bone Tomahawk. Yeah, he's great. Side note over. Written and directed by Drew Goddard in his first ever movie since writing for Buffy, The Cabin in the Woods walks arm in arm with its other creator, Joss Whedon, who oversaw the process in all of his creative production brilliance as an outsider looking in with the intention of redefining slasher cinema from the clutches of the stark oversaturation of the torture porn genre. Now that's a sentence. It tells the tale of a group of college students, Dana, Holden, Marty, Jules and Kurt, who take a trip to a cabin in the woods for the weekend and in classic fashion find themselves at the behest of all manners of monsters of horror. You see, whilst this film may seem entirely straightforward, that's exactly where it wants you to be, and soon enough the veil is pulled back in a truly brilliant manner. I don't want to spoil anything, but the fact that this movie finds itself on this list may be a little telling, because it takes a while to figure out the cosmic horror behind this very evident cosmic horror movie. And yes, whilst it would take the entirety of this movie for you to fully realise the extent of that cosmic horror, the final moments are kind of eye-opening. This is also one of the finest horror movies of the 2010s, so yeah, there's also that too. Coming in at number 2, Event Horizon, 1997. Okay, you guys saw this one coming, right? I mean, whilst this remarkably underrated movie also managed to find its way onto the first part of our list as its honourable mention, now that we've got space for a part 2, it's only right that we give it fair list service. And talking of space, this is also perhaps the only movie that manages to go to the titular void in its pursuit of discovering the cosmic horror behind the horror. Also, talking of space travel, and before we talk about the many injustices that have befallen this movie, the fact that Event Horizon is so underrated as a horror movie is one thing, but it's also underrated as a straight up science fiction success, because the physics behind this movie are remarkably sound. A black hole wormhole as a means for instantaneous space travel. Yeah, now we're thinking with pause, guys. However, the events of this movie will certainly make you think twice about the true extent of that, so yeah, be careful what you wish for, really. Written by Philip Eisner and directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, a director who historically has certainly been more missed than hit, and which may also form part of the reason that Event Horizon is often so overlooked. That's just not the only reason that you should check it out. This film is horrific, man, on an existential level. Set in 2047, Event Horizon tells the tale of a rescue vessel, Lewis and Clark, that is dispatched to an area of Proxima Centauri to recover a long-lost vessel, the Event Horizon, that disappeared during its maiden voyage and had been considered lost for over 7 years before the brave crew of the Lewis and Clark decided to do something about it. Its crew, Captain Miller, played by the brilliant Lawrence Fishburne, alongside Lieutenant Stark, Pilot Smith, Medical Technician Peters, Engineer Ensign Justin, Dr. DJ, Rescue Technician Cooper, and of course Dr. William Weir, played by Sam Neill himself, the genius architect behind the Event Horizon's pioneering spacefaring technology. You see, Dr. Weir has a personal interest in rescuing his long-lost ship, as he was the one who designed the ship's experimental gravity drive, which in turn generates an artificial black hole that then bridges 2 points in space-time for instantaneous travel across astronomical distances. Sounds too good to be true? Well, yeah, I'll say no more. The performances of the film are fantastic. Sean Pertwee, Jason Isaacs, Kathleen Quinlan, Richard T. Jones, Jolie Richardson, and of course Neil and Fishburne themselves, this movie is great. It's as cosmic horror as it comes. Give it a watch, please. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Prince of Darkness, 1987.
Suppose there is a universal mind controlling everything, a God willing the behavior of every subatomic particle.
Okay guys, maybe you saw this one coming, maybe you didn't, but for the astute amongst you, you'll understand that John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy is now 3 for 3 on this cosmic horror list, and rightly so in my book. Yeah, The Thing pinched number 1 comfortably, and 1995's In the Mouth of Madness snipped a respectable 3rd spot, although it probably could have punched much higher. I was just being whatever. But I think the one that we left out, 1987's Prince of Darkness, rightfully deserves its placement here for an entirely different reason. Compared to the other 2 movies in the Apocalypse trilogy, Prince of Darkness is wholeheartedly unique, and in many senses it's one of the most unique films that John Carpenter has ever created. Yes, this movie is the definition of cosmic horror, but from an entirely different perspective. You see, this film handles religion in a manner of such cosmic significance that it turns the concept of an ape living on a pale blue dot who worships an all-powerful entity in the sky into one of the most existentially terrifying things imaginable. Now, that's not to say that this movie sets about to offend anyone, it just switches the way that we think of these things, and that is a remarkable thing for a horror director to do. Written and directed by John Carpenter, Prince of Darkness tells a tale of a mysterious priest played by the legend of horror cinema, Donald Pleasence himself, who invites a renowned physicist, Professor Howard Birack, along with his group of students to join him in the basement of a monastery belonging to the equally mysterious Brotherhood of Sleep, a supposedly ancient order who allegedly communicate with each other through their dreams. Here they are also in possession of a strange cylinder that contains a swirling green liquid that the priest believes to be sentient. What is it? Well, that's down to physics to decide. You see, the greatest function of John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness is that it manages to take the vast expansive space of cosmic horror and distill it down to a different level of existential dread. It takes the macro to the micro, and some of the themes that it covers, whilst perhaps not as obvious as some of his other movies, are some of the most challenging in cosmic horror cinema, if not horror cinema as a whole. And for that reason, it takes our number 1 spot here today. Give it a watch, because Prince of Darkness is just awesome. It really is.
Coming in at 5, Pandorum. Released in 2009 and directed by Christian Alvart, Pandorum centers on 2 astronauts that wake up in what seems like a pitch black spacecraft. Disoriented and unable to remember who they are or what their mission was, they quickly discover they are not alone. Now, solely based on aesthetics, Event Horizon and Pandorum have a lot in common. And a quick fact for you folks out there, the word Pandorum actually refers to what happens to the human psyche as a result of deep space hibernation. It is characterized by a feeling of abandonment and hopelessness alongside dementia symptoms. Now, the movie literally begins with 2 flight crew members waking up from hibernation on board the Elysium, only to discover it's abandoned and experiencing power fluctuations. They explore and discover some crew members alive and sane, alongside cannibalistic humanoid creatures that are hunting them down. Now, this particular film does have many ties to Lovecraftian horror, because the madness does not come from the creatures themselves, but the humans who are pushed to insanity. Coming in at number 4 is Ukumaki. Released in 2000 and directed by Higuchinsky, the movie centers on Kiri and Shuichi, who are friends in a small town who begin to notice that Shuichi's father, Toshio, has become utterly obsessed with snails, videotaping them in his garden and gathering items that resemble the spiral patterns on their shells. Kiri begins to see spirals elsewhere too, even in the way people dress and comport their bodies. The movie is of course based on the manga of the same name and is an overlooked gem that sadly didn't gain the recognition it deserved during the horror boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. This is well and truly a nightmare movie, with a small town literally being turned into spiral-shaped creatures. Can you imagine that? The terror that unfolds is otherworldly, but at the same time confirms our theories that there is more going on in the universe than we know. Even better, the film never tells us why these strange occurrences are happening, just that one day we're living our lives and the next we're snails. You never know when it might happen. Honestly, this film is beautiful and daring and just downright terrifying, so if you haven't checked it out yet, do it now. Coming in at number 3, Absentia. As we know, not all cosmic horror has to be centered around outer space, with Absentia specifically bringing the horror down to earth. Released in 2011 and directed by everyone's new favourite director Mike Flanagan of Haunting of Hill House fame, Absentia centers on a woman and her sister who begin to link a mysterious tunnel to a series of disappearances, including that of her own husband. Trisha is a woman in California whose husband has been missing for 7 years, and as as she's preparing to declare him dead, her sister arrives with new information about a strange tunnel near their home. The film is in the same creative vein as Don't Be Afraid of the Dark and Pan's Labyrinth, with the two characters being drawn into the influence of a strange supernatural world, referred to as underground, by people who have been there. Now, what makes this movie so effective is the simple fact that the creatures in the movie are so rarely seen, as is the underground itself, with the film focusing more on character development than flashy effects. Never quite get a good look at the monsters, they are always just at the edge of your vision, and although you see very little, the film is still incredibly effective and successfully plays with the audience's imagination. Definitely check it out. Coming in at number 2, Pulse. No film in the horror genre has successfully captured the concept of loneliness quite like Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Pulse. The plot centers on ghosts invading the world of the living via the internet and features two parallel storylines. Now, the movie gives new meaning to the word haunting, as it manages to show us a world where even the undead dread the feeling of loneliness and being alone in the universe. The movie is existential horror at its finest, with ghosts desperately trying to force their way back into the world of the living, whereas the living are committing suicide, and the world is crumbling beneath the misery we call existence. The film is in equal parts terrifying and also an interesting insight into our feelings about the world and our existence within it. Plus, no fear is as great as the fear of not feeling anything at all. The film received rave reviews upon release, with the New York Times stating, "There are very few moments in Kiyoshi Kurosawa's fiercely original, thrillingly creepy horror movie that doesn't evoke a dreamlike dread of the truly unknown." And honestly, no truer words have been spoken. This film should be feasted upon, and if you haven't checked it out yet, go do it now. And finally, coming in at number 1, Sunshine. Directed by the legendary Danny Boyle and released in 2007, Sunshine centers on a team of astronauts who are assigned the huge responsibility of saving the sun. That's right, the entire sun. However, things take an ugly turn when an accident occurs and the lives of the crew members are endangered. Now, the movie itself is a drama horror, and during the deep space mission, the group of specialists must attempt to restoke the dying sun by triggering another nuclear reaction via a massive atom bomb. In the universe of the film, this mission has been undertaken once before, but failed. Thus, every decision the crew members are forced to make invokes a sense of pressure, an entirely real pressure. Now, during this, there are external forces at play that are working to sabotage the important mission, cosmic creatures. However, we don't see them, not at first. Instead, the movie relies on psychological tactics, making it feel like the crew are being driven to the point of madness. Coming in at 5, Life. Life is a 2017 sci-fi horror movie directed by Daniel Espinosa and follows a 6-member crew of the International Space Station that uncovers the first evidence of life on Mars. Now, while Sunshine, a movie we discussed in part 3, deals with what is potentially the end of life on Earth, Life is more concerned with some potential life forms on Mars. One member of the crew manages to revive a cell from a sample of an extraterrestrial organism. However, it rapidly grows into a multicellular organism that starts out as a scientific breakthrough but quickly turns into a creature feature when the organism escapes its containment unit and begins to consume whatever organic life it comes across. Life draws inspiration from The Thing from Another World, aka the novel which inspired the movie The Thing, particularly in terms of its monster. The alien itself, dubbed Calvin, possesses a ruthless survival instinct that pits it against the crew of the ISS. From a story and visual standpoint, the film shares a common theme with Alien, a movie which may make an appearance further down our list. The film depicts effortlessly the claustrophobia and isolation of space, with the cosmic horror styles contrasting beautifully, the feeling of isolation and the feeling you are definitely not alone. Coming in at 4, Beyond the Gates, 2016. Beyond the Gates is a 2016 horror film directed by Jackson Stewart and starring Barbara Crampton. The film follows two brothers who, after the mysterious disappearance of their father, reunite to sift through the contents of his VHS rental store. Among the inventory, they discover an interactive VCR board game which their father viewed just before he vanished. Intrigued as you would be, the boys pop in the tape, press play, and soon discover that it's far from an ordinary game. The video is a portal to a nightmarish alternate reality. The film is an homage to 80s horror, with the VHS board game being hugely popular back in the day. I know that for a fact because my family owned Atmosphere, one of the most terrifying games I've ever played. Look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I digress. The film is very much a cosmic horror, with the two brothers being drawn into another dimension beyond their understanding, in which they are become trapped. If you love 80s and bisexual lighting, you will love Beyond the Gates. Coming in at 3, Lifeforce, 1985. Lifeforce is a 1985 British science fiction horror directed by Tobe Hooper, the man behind the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and written by Dan O'Bannon, the man behind Alien. The movie is based on Colin Wilson's 1976 novel The Space Vampires, and portrays the events that unfold after a trio of humanoids in a state of suspended animation are brought to Earth after being discovered in the hold of an alien spaceship by the crew of a European space shuttle. While not based directly on the mythology of Lovecraft, Lifeforce does share many similar themes, like the rest of our list. It depicts a cold, uncaring universe, and has of course the star-spawned horrors thing going for it as well. Not to mention it takes the old vampire tropes and looks at them through the lens of science rather than superstition, making Lifeforce a breath of fresh air. The movie was conceived by Hooper as a love letter to the Hammer horror films of his early career. The special effects are impressive, even by today's standards, and while the movie's lineage to Hammer horror is apparent, it is also very much a cosmic horror, maybe even more so. Yeah, I said it. Coming in at number 2, Europa Report, 2013. Europa Report is a 2013 sci-fi film directed by Sebastian Cordero, and is a found footage film that recounts the fictional story of the first crewed mission to Europa, one of the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter, following the discovery of water on it. However, we know from the beginning something is to go awry. The crew lost contact with mission control nearly a year ago. All of the footage we see comes from the crew's journal updates, and the updates have been edited together with commentary by their commanding officer on Earth. Now, the film is in a similar vein to Sunshine, a movie we discussed in part 3 of our list, as the horror comes from other humans instead of from an outside force. The film also draws inspiration from Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey in its execution. Now, many folks will argue that it is far from a cosmic horror, let alone related in any way to Lovecraft, simply because there is no outside force at play, merely the downfall of humans. However, the horror comes to us through the loneliness of space and existence, themes that are prevalent in the world of Lovecraft, not to mention the way in which the crew interact with each other, and in the way that they deal with their deteriorating situation. The film is also one of the most beautiful horror films I've ever watched. You should definitely check it out. Finally, coming in at number 1, Alien, 1979. Alien is a 1979 sci-fi cosmic horror directed by Ridley Scott. The movie follows the crew of the commercial space tug Nostromo, who encounter the eponymous alien, a deadly and aggressive extraterrestrial set loose on the ship. Now, surprisingly, Alien isn't always viewed through the lens of the cosmic horror genre, however, I'm here to right that wrong. Starring the legend that is Sigourney Weaver, Alien is by far one of the best examples of cosmic horror due to the simple fact that, in the movie, humans are portrayed as helpless and insignificant beings in comparison to the universe, or reality they're experiencing. Folks often tie Alien in with the world of Lovecraft. Many would disagree though, but I don't think they're so far off. The common thread in a lot of Lovecraft's work is that the universe is an infinitely large and terrifying place. It is uncaring, especially towards us mere humans, and on top of that, there are things out there that have absolutely no regard for our existence. The term cosmic horror itself arrived as a way of describing the nihilistic and terrifying visions Lovecraft had. Therefore, it could be argued that yes, Alien is a Lovecraftian horror in the technical sense. The entire movie follows a group of innocent people being menaced and killed by an external being, a being which cares very little about our existence, and wants instead to occupy our bodies to use them as vessels. That is fear at its finest.